Hello from Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. As you can see in the background, President Donald J. Trump has been impeached for the second time. But that's not what we're here about today. I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about this memorandum that was sent out by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So yesterday, the JCS issued a memorandum to the armed forces calling the recent riots in Washington, D.C. a direct assault on the U.S. Congress, the Capitol building, and the constitutional process. The message to the joint forces, this will be read by every member of the armed forces around the world. The message continued by restating that the United States Armed Forces remain fully committed to protecting and defending the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. So that's kind of the memorandum. And there's been a bunch of comments of what it means and what it doesn't mean. So here's my analysis. First thing is, it reminds me of the Newburgh Address in 1783 by General George Washington to his officers. Early in 1783, the Revolutionary War victory, it was in sight, but peace was kind of unclear. And Washington, the Continental Army, were basically stationed up in Newburgh, New York. The troops were enraged by Congress's failure to actually provide promised back pay and pensions. On March the 15th of 1783, the officers underneath Washington's command met to discuss a petition. Washington heard about this, and he addressed the officers with a speech. He sympathized about their demands, but denounced their methods by which they were prepared to achieve them. During his speech, General Washington was having a hard time seeing, so he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out a set of glasses. He says, "Gentlemen, you must pardon me, for I have grown not only gray, but blind in the service of my country." He finishes up his speech. The officers then sit there and have a discussion amongst themselves, and they return with a resolution damning the anonymous letters and pledging their support to Congress. That was the first time that we solidified the idea of civilian control of the military. So this memorandum I was sent it last night by several of my fellow officers, and one of them even remarked that it's the first time he's ever received a memorandum that had 32 stars on it, meaning 8 of the service chiefs with 4 stars each. But I want to point out that this memorandum has kind of 3 points, and then there's this one pretty solid discussion point. So the 3 points are: it states that we defend the Constitution and the law, which is a fairly simple one for us military guys. It also calls the events at the Capitol sedition and insurrection. I think it's a very interesting language because that will provide, it's absolutely clear to those in uniform that any participation in this is sedition and insurrection. It's extremely clear. It also formally recognizes President-elect Biden as the commander-in-chief, not just the president, or coming up to be the president on the 20th, but the commander-in-chief. So more than just being the president. A friend of mine who pointed out that notice that the only people who signed this is the service chiefs. There's no signature by the SecDef. There's no signature by the service secretaries. So this is the closest thing we've had to a fracture in civilian control of the military since the 1860s. However, this reinforces the loyalty of the armed forces to the Constitution and not to a political party or a person. So let's kind of take it line by line because it's very short. Obey lawful orders from the civilian leadership. This goes back to the Newburgh Address. We work for the civilian government, period. We're not separate. So when we heard discussions early on about President Trump talking about, maybe the military will make this right, we're not going to make anything right because we work for the civilian government. That the second one is the violent riots, direct assault, that they were sedition and insurrection. There's been some discussion about a captain at Fort Bragg who may have come up to D.C. bringing some people. Now, I don't know whether or not the captain actually was in the Capitol building or just here on leave and protesting. So that's the military will sort that out, not me. There is pictures where it shows like a retired lieutenant colonel in the Air Force who's actually with flex cuffs and so forth. there's a possibility that that person could be pulled back on active duty and court-martialed for sedition. And it talks about our oath of office. Any act to disrupt the constitutional process is not just against our traditions, values, and oath. And that oath during the 1700s was very short. It was just talking about taking an oath to support the Constitution. In 1860s, yes, the Civil War era Congress, they changed the oath of office in order to talk about the possibility of traitors and that type of thing. That's our oath. Once again, it gets into President-elect Biden will be inaugurated and will become our 46th Commander-in-Chief. And then the very, very last two sentences are ones that the media has kind of talked about and said, stay ready. What's that mean? That the military is staying ready for pro-Trump supporters and so forth? It's not the way I read it. So it says, stay ready, keep your eyes on the horizon, and remain focused on the mission. Our mission in the United States military is to win our nation's wars. That's our mission. It's pretty straightforward. Keep your eyes on the horizon. That's not domestic. That's overseas. So it's telling the men and women of the armed forces, our job is to safeguard our country, that we need to be ready, keep our eyes on the horizon, keep our eyes overseas for threats overseas, remain focused on our mission to win our nation's wars. I see this as the 2021 version of the Newburgh Address. It's a fantastic memorandum. I think this will go down in the history books. That's my analysis of the memorandum. If you agree or disagree with the analysis, give me some comments below. Tell me what you see as the proper objectives and constraints and so forth that we would always put into a military plan. And we will talk about it.